Welcome everybody to this discussion about contraception and specifically the contraceptive pill. My name is Ellie Lee. I work at the University of Kent, where I am the director of a research centre called the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies. And a lot of what we do, or some of what we do anyway, has been to look at family planning as part of parenting and family life. And I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to put on this discussion. I want first of all to thank Claire Fox and Jeff Kidder from the Academy of Ideas, who for several years have given us the opportunity as the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies to programme discussions at this event, and it's just a delight to be able to work with them and do this. So we've also put on a couple of discussions as part of one of the other strands on the modern family as well as this one, so thanks to them. I also want to thank British Pregnancy Advisory Service for supporting and sponsoring this session as part of the festival. And in fact, I can directly thank Anne Furedi, who's now sitting here next to me, who's the Chief Executive Officer of British Pregnancy Advisory Service. The reason why I wanted to put this discussion on specifically actually came out of my experience of supervising a PhD student who at the moment is doing a doctoral thesis about emergency contraception. And it was just through helping her and being involved with her research, I became much more attuned than I had been to the extent of the discussion that's now happening about hormonal contraception in all its forms. I'm much more aware of a lot of the discussions that are happening about the contraceptives pill specifically. And there's absolutely loads and loads of it once you start looking. I mean, there's masses of discussion every week. So just to give you a few examples of the sorts of thing, an article from Vogue, a long article that starts this way: the pill, love it or hate it, chances are at some point you've used it. In its glory days, it represented the liberation of women from the fear of unwanted pregnancies, allowing them to act freely and safely for the first time ever. But if you're a millennial, born roughly between 1982 and 1996, it's likely your attitude is more complex. In fact, younger women are turning away from the pill in droves. And that was kind of my starting point, which struck me as very interesting because I've always, you know, having followed a lot of these discussions for a long time, the pill has always been controversial. There's always been debate about it. There's lots of discussions about its safety. But this particular sort of objection, the idea that, how many of you in this room are millennials? Okay, so you lot don't like the pill, apparently. I thought that was really interesting. So that was one thing. You start looking more what to do if your contraceptive pill is affecting your mental health, a big theme in the discussion. Why can't we have the male pill? A condom alternative could be worth billions. What's taking so long? Which seem to be a lot of the characteristics. On top of that, we've also got this discussion, which there's been an awful lot of recently, about non-hormonal forms of contraception, natural family planning, for example, natural cycles. I'm sure a lot of you saw the discussion about that recently. So I just thought there's an awful lot to discuss here and that things have changed quite considerably. I have got what I think is a fantastic panel to discuss this. First of all, Lesley Hall. Lesley Hall is a historian, retired archivist, Wellcome Library research fellow. One of my most favourite people to read. If you haven't read her work and you're interested in these subjects, read it. Notably, she has written extensive biographies of some women who are very important in the general history of this area of family planning, including Stella Brown and Marie Stopes. So it's fantastic to have Lesley here. This is Jane Dickson. Jane's professional title, so I get this correct, is Vice President and Consultant, Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Healthcare, Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists, so it's quite long. Jane, I've invited because I think it's fair to say that you have made a lifelong contribution to promoting contraception, its provision. Is that a fair description of your life's work?
that seems to be all I do sometimes.
There you go. Okay, so that's Jane. And Ella Whelan. People who've been here over the weekend will know a lot about Ella. She's put on a massive amount of effort and discussions through the weekend. Ella, apart from anything else, is the author of a book called What Women Want. Its subtitle includes the end to feminism as something that what women want, but also the words fun and freedom. And I thought it would be great to have Ella here because certainly proponents of the pill, and one of the arguments associated with the pill and its connection to women's liberation has most certainly been about fun and freedom, about women being able to enjoy sex and feel free from the threat of unwanted pregnancy. So I thought it would be interesting to have another take on this potentially. But anyway, so we'll see what happens. So what I'm going to do is just ask each of my speakers to tell me about what they think. We won't go on for too long, and then we'll go out and see what you think. So to start with you, Lesley, from a historian's point of view, I mean, a lot of these women in the early 20th century, their dream was of a pill that would free women from the threat of unwanted pregnancy. So what do you make of all of this?
I think it was a dream of something that would free women from the threat of unwanted pregnancy. Whether it was a hormonal pill which would act in the way that the pill did, in particular the early forms of the pill which had massive side effects, I think one can, put a big question mark over that. And in fact, some of the more radical thinkers, such as Stella Brown, were already thinking in terms of the abortion pill, an actual effective abortifacient that women could take in the privacy of their own homes if they found themselves falling pregnant. And, they would not need to have to do with the paraphernalia of contraception. In the early 1960s, I think there was already... Women were already kind of in a position where they wanted more reliable forms of contraception. They already have various methods available to them. And this was also a period of the great pharmaceutical fix for everything. In the kind of antibiotic era, there was this idea that drugs could fix everything. And I think there had not yet been the backlash against that. So I think the pill was seen as part of this kind of idea that there was a magic bullet for all ills. And whether, at other times or with another, as it were, perceptual framework, other solutions might have been considered or available is, an alternative history kind of thought experiment.
Okay.
And of course, there was also the IUD coming. In fact, there had already been intrauterine devices, and there were women, some of the kind of more bohemian women of the 1920s and 30s were using intrauterine devices to avoid pregnancy while leading lives of free love, which is kind of an underexplored area in the history of contraception. But it was not kind of in any way a kind of popularized method until like the late 60s, early 70s. But there were, the thing is with the pill, there were critiques from very early on. It was not something that was accepted with glad cries generally. Certainly it was seen as potentially something that would liberate women. But from, really quite early on, there was both the idea that it was liberating women from the fear of pregnancy, and many women were saying, I do not care what the side effects were, I do not want to be pregnant again, I do not want to risk another pregnancy, which was a thing women had been saying about methods of avoiding pregnancy for a very long time. They had been saying that about backstreet abortion for a long time. Women have been saying things that they have been desperate to avoid pregnancy, and they will take a lot of risks to do that. But also, once they were in the position of considering this and considering the alternatives, they were becoming critical. I think one does not need to say that, it's only now that women are beginning to consider the downsides. And I remember some years ago saying, you know, oh, those women of the 70s taking the pill, they were not thinking of the ecological consequences. You know, they were all concerned about overpopulation at that time. It was a big thing.
So what do you make of, I mean, in the minds of many, the pill, the sexual revolution and women's freedom are very much bound up together. So do you think that's just myth-making?
To some extent it was myth-making, because quite soon you find that it was not liberating, because women were finding that it was just, men thought women are on the pill, fear of pregnancy is no longer a reason for women to refuse us. Why should we not have sex with them all the time? Why are they not letting us have sex with them? And this becomes an issue, and women are starting to consider this question of male sexual entitlement. There's a lot of discussion of this in the writings of the women's liberation movement.
What do you think, Anne? Because, I mean, if you take the beginning of the women's liberation movement, and something I know that you've written quite a lot about, so part of the four demands, there was, of course, free abortion on demand, but also freely available contraception, which a lot of people took to mean the pill, didn't they? Or do you not think that? And how much significance would you attach, because quite a lot of the histories do attach significance to this, the fact that it's a female-controlled form of contraception as opposed to other methods?
Well, I think, I mean, the point that Lesley makes about early use of the IUD and so on, I'm not so familiar with. I think that one of the important things about the pill was that it was seen as being a method which a woman was using and which therefore put her in control. She wasn't dependent upon a man using a sheath. But I also think that what was very important about it was that it separated the contraception from the having sex. Yeah. And I think in terms of looking at, you know, the point that Ella raises in the title of her book, What Do Women Want? I think that back then, as now, one of the things that women wanted was good sex, and to be able to think about sex without having to not only worry about pregnancy, but actually not having to think about contraception either.
Not having to fiddle around
that much and fiddling around. And I think that one of the things that has really changed things is that at that time, this was pretty much the only method of hormonal contraception that was on the table. And then what's happened now since is that contraception has developed so that doctors are no longer so keen on the pill, because the reason why doctors are not so keen on the pill is because they think it's far too fallible, and they tend to much prefer the long-acting methods of contraception, implants and IUDs. I'll say, look, if you want to remain unpregnant, it's better to use something that doesn't rely on you having to take a pill every day. So implants, hormonal injections, IUDs, are seen as being much more effective. So a lot of doctors are dissuading women from continuing on the pill. And I think a lot of women, and this is a big issue of controversy at the moment, are sort of reviewing contraception and thinking, well, actually, do I want to be dependent on anything that involves me having to interface with doctors at all? So lots of women are very resentful about the emphasis on these long-acting reversibles that they don't have much day-to-day control over. And I think there's a general thing where they're also sort of thinking, but hang on, do I want to be seeing a doctor to talk about getting the pill? And, you know, it's one of the reasons why you were saying, Ellie, that these apps and new ways of looking at fertility management, I think, come into being, because I suppose what you sacrifice with the non-hormonal methods is the ability not to have to think about contraception at all, because you're having to think about what time of the month it is. But at least you're not having to think about going to the doctor and getting a prescription either.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good point to bring you in, isn't it? Doctor.
Thanks.
I wasn't being horrid about doctors.
Well, but the idea that talking to doctors about this isn't something women particularly relish the prospect of. And I wondered if you could also talk about what you think's changed. And are you seeing more younger women who really aren't very keen on hormones?
So I suppose I'd start off by saying that the primary reason that most people have sex is not to have a baby. So, that's probably the least important reason that people have sex nowadays is to get pregnant. So not only do we go back to the issue, the feminist issue, but ultimately contraception has been so liberating in terms of the fact that women are able to enjoy education and employment. So vast social advancements compared to when we didn't have contraception. And one thing I would say, going back to the introduction of the pill, is it was very, very high dose. And those early dose pills, in some stages, were 100 times stronger than the preparations we have now. But yes, doctors and healthcare professionals, we do realise that, in fact, the contraceptive pill is one of our least reliable methods of contraception. So we do sort of promote actively these long-acting methods that Anne has suggested. But also we are advancing and are looking at new ways of using technology. So in fact, enormous steps have been undertaken recently to allow women to actually get contraceptive pills online. So you'll see increasingly that pharmacies can provide the contraceptive pill actually without the need to see a medical professional, provided that they make a self-assessment in terms of their health. I suppose the thing that I would say is that in the sort of clinics I work in, so I work in quite deprived areas where women are actively seeking effective contraception. I think the women that are looking for the sort of more natural methods, the app-based contraceptive technology, the online, those tend to be a different group of women to those that present routinely to us in our clinics. So most women that I'm seeing are actively seeking the most effective method that they can access.
So are you saying that, what are you saying about the women who look to something like natural cycles? Are you saying they're from more middle class sectors of society?
I think it's fair to say that the assessment does show that. Also tends to be people that are relying on social media, what their friends are doing. There has been a lot of hype into, the adverse effects of hormones. Ultimately, though, things like Natural Cycles, so Natural Cycles is an app that people can use their phone to chart their own natural cycle and when they're fertile and not. It doesn't introduce any new technology other than the principles of natural family planning that we've been using since introduction of natural family planning. Yeah. All it does is give you a virtual chart rather than a piece of paper.
Yeah. Can I ask you one more thing? Mm-hmm. So you talked about this issue of kind of making hormonal contraception much more accessible, that there's not really any reason for having to go and have all these checkups with GPs. Where do you stand on emergency contraception? Should we stop seeing it as an emergency and instead make that much more available as well? Are you favourable towards that?
I think that emergency contraception is one area where we have done a lot to make it a lot more accessible. Most contraception doctors, though, we're quite cautious with regard to emergency contraception because I think most people don't realise how ineffective the oral emergency contraceptive pill can be at times of high fertility. So there is a very high risk of the emergency contraceptive pill failing when you're at your peak fertility. So in fact, one of the reasons that the emergency pill has such a high success rate is that many people take it at times in their natural cycle when they were never going to fall pregnant anyway. So in those situations, healthcare professionals would be probably recommending something like an emergency coil, an IUD, intrauterine device, which has a failure rate of only 1 in 1,000 compared to 1 in 8 of sometimes when you take the emergency hormonal pill. So I think there does need to be some element of self-assessment. Certainly, I was one of the lead campaigners to get the price of emergency hormonal contraception dropped and was involved in the Boots debacle. But so it should be much more available. And to be honest, when Levanel, which is the sort of basic form of emergency contraceptive pill, it only costs a clinic £3 to buy, it's absolute sin that women might have to pay £29 to access that at the pharmacy.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ella, so fun. I mean, presumably you do take the view that sex should be for fun, not having babies, and that's most of the reason why we do it. So that's one thing to ask you about. I mean, not you personally, your generation. I was also, well, I mean, say whatever you want to say, but I was also wondering if you and then perhaps some in the audience can say what you think about this issue around this perceived connection between the contraceptive pill and mental health, and the contraceptive pill being seen as this thing that gives you a real downer, which for, you know, when I went on the pill when I was younger, there was a lot of discussion around things like, you know, thrombosis. You know, it's much more physical health concerns, which we then routinely ignored because we were just really glad to get it. But people didn't really talk about this, but the pills were a higher dose, actually. So I'm genuinely curious about that whole discussion.
Yeah, no, I'm very disappointed that Vicky's not here, because the thing that she's arguing about mental illness and the pill is pretty widespread. And I've been sort of shocked and taken aback at the discussion among some of my peers about worries about the pill and side effects of the pill. I'm pretty torn on this issue because I'm not a doctor, but I've tried every contraceptive method out there. None of them has really ever sat well with me. So I think there's a very strong argument for making contraception better. I don't think you should have to, you know, pass up the fact that you might gain loads of weight and lose your half of the hair of your head and have all sorts of side effects just on the basis of not getting pregnant. We should make contraception much better and the side effects much less. However, the idea of a pill, to me, is fabulous, is fantastic. You know, I used to use the pill when I was younger, when I used to go on holidays with my girlfriends, not to prevent pregnancy, but to stay off my period so that I wouldn't be on my period when I was having in a bikini on the beach. You know, I saw it as this very empowering thing, actually. And the worry that I have about the sort of anti-science discussion around certainly mental health and the pill is that there's this creeping argument coming back in that women are sort of slaves to their bodies and slaves to their hormones. So the panic about the pill really at the moment, and about it affecting moods and it giving you mood swings and it sending you into the depths of depression, just has that tinge of that sort of reactionary argument that women cannot control their own bodies, cannot control their own minds when they're just sort of slaves to whatever's going on in their reproductive systems. And I think that's something that should certainly be resisted. I mean, if you look at these apps that are used now, and they're incredibly popular, I've got one called Clue, and it doesn't just ask you to do the things that were used in the past, the Billings method of temperature checks or anything like that. It also asks you about how greasy is your hair, what's the consistency of your stool. I mean, it's really so widespread that you think there's not enough time in the day for me to chart what's going on in my body in relation to this app. It asks you about how you're feeling, how well you slept. I mean, it's completely undermining what I think the politics behind the pill was, which was that you can override the trappings, if you will, of your body. You can stop the thing that you don't want to happen in your body in pregnancy, and use this magic pill, as it were, to give yourself freedom and give yourself fun. I just don't understand why some women are turning away from that. I mean, I'm fascinated by your suggestion that it's middle-class women who are sort of being reluctant about this. I think there's certainly something in there. The obsession with our bodies, whether it be about monitoring our mental health, monitoring our hormones, seems to me to be sort of dragging us back into, a past in which women were slaves to what happened in their bodies and not agents of themselves and agents of their bodies and able to decide when and where they were going to have sex and when and where they were going to have pregnancy. And just a final point on that is that I find such an interesting link between this discussion about contraception and the what's happening in relation to the morning after pill, because it strikes me as relevant that there is still so much myth-making around, in public discussion about the morning after pill. I mean, so many women that I know still think that if you take the morning after pill several times, you'll be infertile, or, it's going to mean that it's like the same as an abortion. I mean, there's so little knowledge on the basis of that, so much scaremongering around that. So you think you're freaking women out about contraception here, and as we see with the Boots debacle and the kind of the law around the morning after pill, women are, I think it's fair to say, actively encouraged not to access it. I think that's directly relating to this sort of reaction against the pill. It's that there's something going on that says women shouldn't be so involved and shouldn't be so attracted to using medicine to define their futures. And that, to me, doesn't seem right.
Okay. So we've got loads that we can come back to. We definitely need to talk about the male pill a bit, but let's just get some opinions from the floor first.
I just wanted to make a point about the role of practitioners in this, because I think there is a big difference.
Petitioners.
Practitioners. People who advise doctors on the pill. So from my personal experience, I tried the pill twice. Once it was in England and once it was in Italy. When I got given the pill in England, I didn't basically receive any advice on it. I was just presented with few options, and then I was in charge of choosing. No exams, no physical visit, and I felt empowered because I had the chance to choose, but I also felt I wasn't knowledgeable enough about this. I was given the chance to choose, but I wasn't given the knowledge upon which to base my choice. And that went terribly wrong. That experience of the pill went terrible for me, to the point that I was so scared of taking the pill again. But then eventually I got convinced from my own sister, who's a gynecologist, who prescribed me one in Italy with exams, with full consultation, telling me if this doesn't go right, you have other options. This is what you should know about your own natural cycle. This is everything that you need to know before making a choice. And now I've struggled a bit for the first couple of months, but I am way happier because I'm more in control because I received the knowledge for it. So I think there is a lot about knowledge other than choice, because knowledge underpins choice.
So you're saying that family planning doctors, or whatever we want to do, you want to call it family? Anyway, I'd like to know what you think. Do you think family planning's a weird term?
No, we don't like that.
I know. Doctors that prescribe contraception or provide you'd like them to be more involved, spending more time with you? Okay.
Y'all don't know how good you have it over here. I mean, women in America and around the rest of the world have not such easy access to contraception. It's a highly politicized issue, and it's important that we discuss all contraception and not only just the pill. My experience as a young woman growing up in America before the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, was an experience of great difficulty in obtaining birth control. Even with health insurance, it would have cost me $1,000 to get out of pocket for the IUD. Jane, I really appreciated you discussing other forms of birth control, because I think that one form of birth control is fit for any woman. Well, shortly after I moved to the UK, and I got my IUD 100% for free. But in other areas around the world, it's illegal. my mother from Peru, where contraception has only just become legal, and in other places around the world, it's still illegal. Should we instead be discussing contraception in the rest of the world, where it is illegal?
Yeah, so my experience, I think what I felt at the beginning is actually the lack of choice. I didn't feel like I had the choice, actually, so I went and they suggested to me a pill called microgynon back in the time. Microgynon is actually a pill that is from ages and ages ago, and there are so many more updated versions following that. But I was a bit naive at the time, so I accepted it, and it genuinely had an impact on me, on my physical body, on my mental illness. Like it actively changed me from being, from many aspects in my life. And I really researched it, and I spoke with people. I'm originally from Greece, where actually they also do blood tests, and they really see your hormonal imbalances and what you need. And I went back to the GP, and I said, actually, I want to change. I want to go to Yasmin. I looked at what options I have, and I would like to go to Yasmin. And the amount that they insisted on me staying on microgynon, it's like, actually, no. And it came out that they told me it's a much cheaper option. I was like, okay, but it's a choice for my body and what I take, and I want to have that choice on what I choose. And I think the first point should be, what is the right pill for the exact person, and how can we make that a bit more accessible, even if it means me subsidizing it. I would rather subsidize it and have the right thing in.
Can I just ask you, is it your kind of first choice method overall, and if so, for what I mean, is it in your mind, is it because it is just potentially a really good form of contraception that, makes the whole thing more fun and easier and less messy and so on?
Yeah, I had that. That just didn't really sit well with me. I think, reacted badly to it. I did have it for 2 years, but my sex life was very badly affected from it, so I moved away from it, and that's when I moved to Yasmin as a choice. I think the pill is more easily accessible. It feels a bit. I get your point on what you put in your body, but with the implant as well, this thought of like not having a control and having something, it's just, for me personally, didn't fit. I totally get other people would do it. So yeah.
Well, I'm another microgynon girl, and for me, microgynon and going on the pill was a very liberating experience. It's from an Irish Catholic family. Actually, going to your family doctor, was a bit intimidating in that circumstance. So then it was the Brook Advisory Clinic. So I went down to Tottenham Court Road, age 16. Going out to work, and those sort of halcyon days really between then and when I went to university. My experience when I went to university was women clinics and this massive book called Our Bodies Ourselves, which sort of kind of encouraged you to take a mirror and look at your bits, and they had these diaries where you kind of charted your cycle and thought about when the moon was full and things like that. It was all very kind of seductive in a way. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are technical problems with the pill, and yes, there's been improvements since microgynon. I also tried all those other ones because that was it. Feminism really was a big influence for young women going to university in the early 80s, and that was what was having a bigger impact on me than anything else. So I was looking at all of these pills, and it was looking at all of this kind of discussion about women's fertility, and it was a political issue really rather than a technical one. So I, ended up sort of being very susceptible to pill scares, and I smoked, so I thought I'm going to get thrombosis. Stopped taking the pill, used the diaphragm, got pregnant, and the doctors like saying, in my day, you would just, there wouldn't be any of this nonsense, you just have the baby, and that was a big problem because doctors had to sign for you to be able to get the abortion. You couldn't still really control your fertility. So I guess, the point I'm making is that, yes, there are technical problems with contraception, but a lot of the distrust of contraception and this kind of discussion are it's about politics rather than about these kind of biological aspects, to it.
I'm actually a GP and I'm getting a bad press here, but I'll put up with it. What I would like to say is that, first of all, yes, I agree there should be choice, and I prescribe Yasmin. If a woman comes in and asks me for Yasmin, I prescribe Yasmin. And so I think that's important that doctors do listen to what their patients want. And we are pressured to keep to drug budgets, but I've always taken the view that my patient choice is more important than that. The points about the long-acting contraception, we were actually given, well, not so much now, but a few years ago, we were actually given financial incentives to prescribe long-acting and to actually discuss it. But that particular part of QOF has gone. The other thing that I think is still completely wrong is what this lady has just mentioned about the two signatures for a termination, and that should go, especially in these days when most terminations are done by an oral method and not a surgical method at all. And I see there's just been a recent move to allow this second pill to be taken at home, which is a step in the right direction. But to still have it as a criminal, an actual criminal act to have a termination, and to still need two doctors to sign, I think really should be changed, and I think we should campaign on that.
At which point I'm going to take Anne, who is spending her time doing that. Anyway, one brief comment, one each from the front, and then I will come back out again, yes.
It's just a quick one. I mean, I completely agree with all the points that you've just made about abortion, but just on this thing about incentives to provide, yeah, they are there completely within the system. And as an abortion provider, we provide abortions on more than 100 different contracts with the NHS in different areas in the country. And when a clinical commissioning group, who are the people who purchase your healthcare, commission an abortion provider to provide an abortion service, they build in a target, a key performance indicator for how many women are supposed to leave our service with a long-acting method of contraception. And there are financial incentives to meeting that. It's typically about a third that you will need to, or sometimes 50% of women who should leave. And if you're an organisation that's values are based on the idea that women should have their choice, then you basically wave two fingers at the commissioners and you say, well, actually, no, we're not going to assess ourselves on that key performance indicator. We actually think that women should be able to choose the method that they want. But I think it comes back to this idea constantly that they often have a kind of idea in their mind of the women who are, in their view, stupid enough to fail on contraception and therefore need an abortion service. And the commissioners will see them as young and feckless women who therefore need some kind of extra help. And it's a really unhelpful stereotyping of what goes on. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us really to campaign against that and say that women should be able to choose fully.
I did think on that, by the way, and I'd be interested in what you thought. When all the discussion broke out about natural cycles, I was very taken aback listening to a lot of the kind of radio phone-in shows and discussions about it, of the extent to which a lot of people said, well, which women would be so stupid as to think that that's going to stop you getting pregnant, and how could women be so irresponsible, and really, why aren't they on the pill? And I was surprised at the extent of the kind of hostility, actually. Anyway, do you want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, I'll pick up on a couple of the pill comments, if that's okay. So, first of all, I think the reason for a consultation with a healthcare professional is about screening out any major medical problems that would make the pill dangerous. But the vast majority of young women don't have those problems. And increasingly, we're recognising that physician input is just not necessary. So we're going to see a new contraceptive pill guideline launched soon, which actually says that women don't even need to come back and get their blood pressure checked. So I think it has been too medicalised. That's number one. So I would actually advocate more freedom. Secondly, the issue of microgynon. And yes, I'm very much in support of free choice. But ultimately, in this country, we are lucky. We do have free contraception. And I think one thing people don't realise is that contraception is funded from public health budgets rather than from the NHS. And public health budgets sit in your council, not in your NHS. They're not in the NHS. So that means when contraceptive services are funded, they're competing with things like who takes out your bins, not the benefit of other medical complaints. And I'm afraid that the sad reality is that microgynon is cheap. And if we look at the fact that 3.5 million women take the pill, microgynon costs £1, Yasmin costs £15. So we're talking 3.5 million versus 500 million. It's a no-do. It's just not a feasible option. So what we have is we have lots of different pill preparations, and we can titrate that pill, so we can adjust the pill according to which side effects a woman may or may not develop. The other thing is, hundreds and thousands of women are very happy on microgynon, and it's just that we hear about the small number who aren't. So I do think we have a broad population responsibility as well. So I think unless there is a specific reason, there is a definite rationale for why we have to act in that way.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, who's ever taken cocodamol when they've put their back out? I have. It's fantastic. It means you can get on with your day, but boy, does it make you constipated. I mean, like, there's some bad side effects to that. I mean, we can have a discussion about making medicine better and about making side effects less, and I would welcome that. I think most women would welcome that. But the point is, I think you're right. We do always hear the kind of the scare stories and the bad stories about it. And really, I want to bring it back to what that is saying about what we're telling women about contraception, because you can't get away from the fact that so much conversation about contraception is based on danger. So whether it be about discussion about abortion, and the reactions to abortion still is that it's this sort of terrible danger for women, that it will harm women. Discussions about the morning after pill, again, are about the danger to women that might pose. And so then hearing young women pick up about and say that they feel like that they need to have their hormone balances checked, or that they are worried about putting something into their body that's going to affect their body, I think that's a bit of a worrying and reactionary turn, because surely the whole point of gaining fun and freedom, especially over our reproductive cycles, is that you do intervene. Otherwise, we would all be, well, not all, but most of us would be having babies very, very young. One of the most interesting points about this, I was talking about this with a retired midwife, a friend of mine, who trained in the Coombe in Dublin. She said that she remembers when the woman, one of the nurses, came in to teach the Billings method, and how revolutionary and radical that was in Dublin at the time, for someone to be teaching women about how to attempt to prevent pregnancies. And it was just like mind-blowing that this was happening. And I was thinking about that along with the natural cycles thing, and I was thinking, well, then the pill came along and completely eradicated the necessity for you to stick a temperature thing wherever you need to stick it, and just take this pill, and it kind of works. So what do we want? Do we want to make women's lives easier? I think it's completely possible to do that with contraception. And I'd be interested to hear from some guys in the audience, by the way, or women, about the male pill, because I'm also fascinated about that discussion, because again, that's like taking the control out of women's hands, whether it be to leaving it up to what body, whether you have sex at the right time in your fertility cycle and count the days right, or whether you leave it up to the guy you're sleeping with to deal with it. I think what's missing here is the discussion about women's control over their own bodies, which in all anti-choice discussions and all anti-abortion discussions is the central tenet that women can't be trusted. I think that
I'm going to take a quick comment from Lesley.
The thing I was fascinated by was thinking about going back to our bodies ourselves and women starting thinking about their own cycles and charting them and contrasting that with what Ella was saying about this kind of obsessive charting of cycles and the difference between women sort of finding out about their own bodies, which they had been told a lot of myths about and which they had not been kept in ignorance of, and this kind of obsessive focusing on the minutiae of their physical being, and the difference between that, which I'm having problems in kind of articulating, but there is something between kind of finding out about themselves in a revelatory fashion and kind of getting very kind of intricate and microscopic.
It's a different kind of myth making, isn't it?
You know, there's something very different there. It's between opening up and closing down in some way.
I just wanted to share kind of my own experience of contraception. So a couple of years ago, I moved to start natural cycles, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's very task heavy and requires a huge amount of discipline, which is super hard. But the reason for that is because I didn't want to be penalized for if I don't want to be pregnant, then I'm going to be suffering mental health, then I'm going to be having a face full of pimples, then I'm going to be gaining weight. So it just felt like there was no choice for me at all. So it's either that or the other, and you choose. And especially within the NHS, there has been, and you know, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know, but there were no tests at all to see whether my body was, you know, how receptive was my body to the pill or the implant that I was given. And it almost felt like Merck & Co., or whatever the company that makes the pills, is just pumping loads of overleft stock to the NHS, and NHS is just dishing it out to people coming. So for me, it just feels like we're kind of like trapped in this space of either that or the other. And I think the reason I love natural cycles is it almost gives us another alternative. It may be very task heavy, and it may be very demanding of time, but it gives us the option of not having to feel physically ill and also not fall pregnant.
I wanted to talk about the fact that it's not just the fact that there is a pill that is the key here, is that it's so easily accessible here. When I went to the doctor, I was just asked several control questions, which allowed them to establish I would never be able to take estrogen pills, which was a big thing. But it gave them enough insight to advise me correctly without any invasive tests, which was remarkably refreshing. Okay. Since when I tried to get contraception in Poland, where I am from, right. I encountered a doctor with a huge cross on her chest, who tried to explain to me the dangers of premarital sex. And when I told her that it's not premarital if you don't intend to get married, it did not go great. So access is a really wonderful thing here, but I also would like to point out that it's a very different thing, talking about contraception, preventing conception, and talking about the morning after pill in terms of contraception. At least it is where I am from, because here it seems to be put on the same level, whereas the Catholic morality, which is prevalent in Poland, indicates that it's a very different thing. Abortion, contraceptive pill, abortion and the contraceptive pill. It's got a much bigger moral scope.
I kind of wanted to talk about removing the responsibility from women a bit, because we kind of started off saying how it's interesting that millennial girls don't want to be on the pill, and we kind of force responsibility onto them a lot. So I know from my own personal experience, it was very liberating being on the pill at first, but people will really downplay the symptoms to me. You know, it was, oh, there's no direct link with your mental health, there's no direct link with your weight, there's no direct link with your skin, go on this contraceptive pill. And at first it's like, great, okay, cool, liberated. And then I know that after 2 years of being on it and I came off it, it was like I'd been looking at the world in a tint of grey and seeing the sun for the first time. And every doctor that I saw after that, whether it was to do with my sexual health or not, in some way found a way to ask me if I was on contraception, and then to downplay my symptoms and to tell me that I should be on contraception, as if it's completely my sole responsibility, as if babies are made with only women and not men. And then when we talk about male contraception, people are very quick to say, no, but the side effects for boys are really, really bad. They get bloated, they have mood swings, and it's awful. And I think that we should take the question away from why don't millennial girls want to be on contraception or don't want to be on the pill, more to why don't millennial boys want to be on contraception? Because at the end of the day, if a woman gets pregnant, she knows about it. Men can go around populating the entire planet and never know that they had a child. So why aren't we putting more responsibility on men?
So I don't use contraception, and I risk getting pregnant, but that's because I'm completely comfortable with the concept of abortion. I would be absolutely okay with having an abortion if that did happen. And I think that's quite an important point to make, because the resistance to doing that kind of thing is because there's still quite a large stigma around abortion and not a lot of knowledge around abortion, and lots of women think that it's this incredibly terrible and significant and life-changing thing to happen, rather than seeing it more as a solution to an issue that they might have, or possible method of contraception even. The issue with the male pill is that I'm yet to meet a woman who would trust their partner, significant or otherwise, with the control over whether or not they get pregnant. You know, no offense to my partner, but I just wouldn't. It's my body. I am the one that's going to get pregnant. I want to have control over that. I want to know that I've taken the pill, or I want to know that I've taken the risk. I think until I'm not hostile to a future at which we liberalise contraception and think differently about it. I think that it can't be beyond humanity and the capabilities of man to think of a different and better way of preventing pregnancy, or even about the whole process of reproduction. But as it stands, for women, I think it's far more empowering to put the control in our hands. And if you have a partner who's willing to come with you to the doctors and do all that kind of thing, fair enough. I can't really see the point in it myself. I think that we're getting into a danger here of saying that because we have these issues with, or supposed issues, and I have to say I haven't ever seen any convincing research or evidence into the links between mental health and the pill. I think a lot of it is scaremongering, which doesn't help. But until we get to a situation where we have a healthier relationship with contraception, we do have to argue that it's fundamental to women's freedom, that it isn't to be transposed into a discussion about boys. I don't want to start having a discussion about millennial boys and contraception until we deal with the issue of women's reproductive rights and women's freedom and women's access to contraception. Jane.
Well, I'll just address a technical issue that's come up. That, believe me, an awful lot of money and research has been done on male contraception. There are places that spend every minute of the day. The difficulty is it's actually fundamentally really difficult scientifically because of the different biology of men and women. So men permanently are producing sperm all the time, every minute of every single day. They're making sperm and they're storing them, whereas women ovulate once a month. So the technicality of controlling that is very difficult. Also, women rely on 3 hormones, men only 1. So the methods that are showing more success are ones which are much higher dose than a pill would ever be. So things like an injection has been tried, an implant has been tried. But unfortunately, because they act on testosterone, they actually block a man's libido and his erection. So it's actually quite helpful as contraception, but it's not necessarily the right way.
Lesley, when do you first remember discussions about the male pill?
Oh, gosh.
It's decades ago, right?
Decades ago, 1970, possibly even earlier. But the thing is, historically, thinking, if you look at the research people have been doing on, reproductive decision-making, there is a history of men taking responsibility for contraception, but it has always been within the context of established relationships where the man feels responsibility for either the economic circumstances of the family and they cannot afford any more children, or he feels a concern for his wife's health and they cannot have any more children, and therefore he will practice withdrawal, which is a problematic thing. He will use a condom, and again that is possibly problematic, or from the late 60s he will have a vasectomy. And there was a significant take-up of vasectomy in the late 60s, 70s, and this seems to have dropped off the map. I don't know whether you know any more about this than I do, but there was a significant thing. But it is always in the context of a stable, long-term relationship where the man has a concern for his partner, where there is emotional investment. I don't think you're going to get men taking interest in their contraceptive decision-making if it's casual. I mean, I'm sorry, that may be cynical. I think you have to have enormous changes in social attitudes before you get that change.
So I was really interested in Ella, this thing about the pill supplanting Billings, that Billings had come in, and then that was, as I think most people know, was followed by Crichton, which is slightly more complicated. But I think just coming at it from the male perspective and saying that I think the only method of collaboration where you have more or less an equal responsibility between the man and the woman is actually some kind of fertility awareness and some kind of natural family planning method. I think that's the only method where the responsibility is shared. And just as a corollary to that, I just think I'm a little bit worried that we aren't, I think it's starting to change here in the UK, but I don't think in terms of the global field, we're looking at fertility awareness methods enough. Because I think in very, very poor places, the benefit of fertility awareness is it is free. You need a practitioner to teach someone in a locality, and that person can then teach the couples in the rest of that area. But you're not kind of connected to drug companies in the same way. It doesn't have the same finance and profit complications. So I really think just in terms of the equal responsibility between men and women here in the West, and at the global level, something that's, a bit more collaborative as well for them, and because it's free.
My question is about trans people. There are lots of trans masculine people that still take the pill either because they want to have a sex life or because they need to take it for medical reasons. And I wonder what you guys think about how you can make access to the pill and to general contraception more accessible for trans people that find going to the doctors to talk about colds really difficult, going to the doctors to talk about reproduction is kind of impossible, and how we can deal with that community of people who otherwise have no access to contraception because of dysphoria and social taboo and stuff like that.
A very quick point again about where to get the knowledge. I'm really obsessed with it because I think getting the knowledge right and getting the good channels with scientific knowledge in order to base your choice on something true is fundamental. And I was wondering, what do you think are the risks of self-assessment, of young girls getting on contraception without consultation, without the experts, which maybe because I'm the daughter of doctors and I've been always surrounded by them, I might be biased, but I'm not trying to take agency out of me. I'm empowered and everything, but I still am not a doctor. So I think, what is the extreme?
Just a quick comment from my side, just following all the discussion that we've had. I totally get that a lot of women might not have effects from getting the contraception and from getting the pill. One slight comment though, a lot of women do, and I feel like the discussion today has been a bit judgmental towards women that might have impacts, either physical or mental, following having contraception. So just a comment from my side, and I'm actually a bit infuriated because I feel like in forums like that, we should be able to be open about that and say, if you want to choose something natural because it didn't fit with you, fine. If it works with you, fine. But I don't want to be judged if I did suffer from a mental or a physical impact from the pill.
No judgment, whatever you choose, genuinely. I think that one of the key things about this and about the work that BPAS does, that Return Support, is about that women should have choice, whether it be in any relation, at any step of their way in their reproductive lives. But at a time when contraception is still so mystified, I mean, if anyone's gone to get the morning after pill, you know that you have to sit through this insanely ridiculous consultation, and I've got it many times, and I just go, yeah, no, give it to me, and snap it out of their hands because I know what I'm doing. I think there's still so much myth-making around contraception and around women's access to the things that will help control their pregnancies and their reproductive lives, that we have to bend the stick when fear-mongering about the pill comes around and say, please remember what a significant and powerful thing this is, and how it has empowered women for years, and how it will continue to empower women, and how different your life would be if you didn't have access to it. And whether that be you choosing natural plannings, whether that you be choosing medical intervention, contraception, all that kind of thing. The thing about it is that the reaction to the pill, to me at the moment, smacks of a kind of anti-science, smacks of a kind of anti-women's choice argument, which has at its centre the argument that women are slaves to their bodies, slaves to their hormones, and unable to take agency in one of the most fundamental things about us, which is whether or not we will get pregnant and whether or not we choose to have children. You have to recognise the reality of the context of what we're working in today, which is, I think, a rather weird relationship with women and their agency and their bodies. And so for that, even though personally I'm not a massive fan of the pill, I find myself championing it.
And I suppose I just want to flag up that there is no definite evidence that hormones are in any way causal to mental health problems. There may well be a link, but there's no cause established. Secondly, there are no tests for your hormones. There are no tests to check which pill would be best for you, because the hormones that are in contraception are synthetic and they don't in any way interact with your own natural hormone levels, so we can't do checks for that. And then just finally, my job as a contraceptive clinician is to support and enable women to choose the best possible contraceptive for them, bearing in mind the risks and what their wishes are. So I hope you don't ever feel judged.
Speaking as a woman, thinking about the male pill, I can't really see anything in it. I mean, largely from the point of view that Jane was saying, is that it's incredibly difficult to stop men from producing sperm. It's incredibly easy to stop women from producing an egg once a month. Why would you bother? You know, it seems to me a lot of money being invested in something that, you know, doesn't really seem to give very much. On the other hand, if I was a bloke, I was saying that, speaking from the point of view of a woman, if I was a guy, I would probably be very keen on something that would enable me to control my own fertility. I do some work with a local army barracks, and on their gate, at their gatehouse, as they go out onto the town in Gillingham in Kent, there's a poster that says what a night on the town can cost you if you don't wear a condom. And it goes through what the child costs will be if you're a sergeant, a corporal, right the way up. And I do think that that's an issue. Pregnancy is a woman's thing, but actually, if I get pregnant, I do get the opportunity to decide whether I'm going to continue the pregnancy. If you, random bloke, get me pregnant, you have no say if I decide that I'm going to continue the pregnancy, but you end up paying for it. So I would be very worried if I was a bloke about my fertility. Just a very final short point. Do you know, I had never thought about this until I sat in this room and people were saying that they were on microgynon. Right, and I was on microgynon 40 years ago. Now, when I think, what is in my bathroom that is the same now as it was 40 years ago? Think about developments in toilet tissue, right? So I would like to see the emphasis on research put into what could be done better with women's contraception, I think.
Lesley?
Yeah, I think this whole thing about the need for choice, for different methods, for what suits the individual woman. And I was just thinking about what various people have just said about female barrier methods, which seem to have dropped out of the discussion. And part of the reason for this is, I think, is because commercial firms don't like making them. They're not commercially viable. And somebody did mention that it's very difficult to get sponges because the firms just don't want to invest in them. And there's a book coming out by Jessica Borge sometime in the next couple of years, which is actually on the condom, but it's we'll also be talking about female barrier methods. And basically, the firms had to make female barrier methods in order to keep in with the Family Planning Association, which was a guarantee of respectability. Yeah. But the real money came from making condoms. But, you know, female barrier methods are, in fact, very reliable. They are... you know, they do not include hormones. There is a lot to be said for them. And I wonder, you know... but they are messy, they are fiddly. But are they as messy and fiddly as the mythology gives out?
Good lubrication, look at it that way.
Yeah.
All right. On that fantastic point, can we thank our speakers? And you. Thank you, audience. So there's some book signing